Right, so the last body system we're going to cover is the reproductive system. We're going to just do a brief overview of reproductive physiology, and then we're going to talk about the male reproductive system and the female reproductive system. Okay, so your reproductive system is all about the production of gametes, right? Males produce sperm or spermatozoa. Females produce eggs or ova. Spermatozoa are one of the smallest cells, and males produce millions, if not billions, if not trillions of them from puberty onward. Okay, eggs or ova are one of the largest cells, and females produce a limited number of them. Okay, both sperm and eggs are what is called haploid. Okay, so they have half the number of chromosomes, or N chromosomes, of all our other diploid cells. Okay, so all of our other body cells are diploid. They have two sets of chromosomes. Okay, our gametes have one set of chromosomes. So for humans, our gametes have 23 chromosomes total. 22 of those are autosomes, and one is a sex chromosome. At fertilization, when the sperm injects its half set of chromosomes into the egg, that zygote is now diploid. Okay, so it has 23 chromosomes that were already in the egg, and it gets 23 chromosomes from the sperm, right? 22 of the sperm's autosomes combine with 22 of the egg's autosomes, and we get 44 autosomes, and then 2 sex chromosomes. Right, so here we actually have a karyotype showing the chromosomes in a human, and so one chromosome came from the mother, one chromosome came from the father. So we have chromosomes 1 through 22 plus the sex chromosomes. Okay, and we've got a pair of each chromosome. And is this karyotype of a male or a female? It's a male, right? Because they have an X chromosome and a Y chromosome. Okay, so the sex chromosomes are the only that are unpaired. Okay, if you have 2 X's, they're technically paired, and you get a female. If you have an X, and then look at how little the Y is. Okay, then you're a male. And this is why there's lots of sex-linked disorders that only show up in males, like hemophilia and color blindness, because they're carried on the X chromosome, and if you don't have a good X chromosome from your father, you're more likely to express something damaged on your mother's X chromosome, okay? Because the Y chromosome doesn't have the full complement of genes that the X chromosome does. The Y chromosome has the genes really important for the development of the male reproductive tract. Okay, so hopefully this isn't news to you, but when a man and a woman are naked and hold hands, that's why I love this figure. It's from my human biology textbook. So I still use it because it makes it seem like if you hold hands when you're naked, you might have a baby, you guys. Be careful, okay? Okay. What this is showing, right, is that the process of meiosis produces haploid gametes. Okay, so cell division comes in 2 flavors, meiosis and mitosis. Okay, gametes are produced by meiosis. Meiosis is where you have replication of DNA, and then the cell divides twice. Okay, so 1 round of DNA replication, 2 rounds of cell division. Meiosis leads to haploid gametes. Okay. Once the sperm fertilizes the egg, the resulting zygote is diploid. Okay, that diploid zygote starts as 1 cell. Okay, and then it's going to undergo many rounds of mitosis. And mitosis is where you get replication of DNA, so 1 round of replication, 1 round of cell division. So the resulting daughter cells are all diploid themselves. Okay, so mitosis is cell division where you get diploid daughter cells. And so mitosis is what then causes an infant to be formed from that single fertilized cell. And then mitosis is also what causes growth and development. Okay? And most of your cells continuously do mitosis, except for cells like your neurons and your muscle cells. Okay? Other than that, most of your cells will replicate themselves via mitosis over your lifespan. Okay, so we're going to talk about the reproductive system. And these are all the organs involved in mating, gametogenesis, and other functions to produce offspring. Okay, so we're going to talk about the gonads, which actually produce the gametes. Right? And they also produce the sex hormones. And we already talked about the gonads when we talked briefly about them in the endocrine system, and I said we were going to come back to them. Okay, so the males have testes as their gonads, and what sex hormone do testes produce? Testosterone. Okay, females have ovaries as their gonads, and what sex hormones do ovaries produce? Estrogen and progesterone, right? And then testes produce sperm, ovaries produce ova or eggs. Okay, and then we'll talk about the accessory reproductive organs in both males and females, and these are the organs of the reproductive tract, which transport the gonads, not the gonads, the gametes, and the glands that secrete fluids into the reproductive tract. Okay, we aren't really going to talk about pregnancy very much, and we'll talk about childbirth only briefly, right? But we'll talk about pregnancy in very little detail right here, okay? So copulation is the act of mating where sperm get deposited into the female reproductive tract, okay? Because sperm have to, it's not even being shown here, have to make it through the cervix. Okay, so they get deposited into the vagina. They have to make it through the cervix, through the uterus, up the uterine tubes to near where the eggs have been ovulated from the ovaries. Okay, once they've been fertilized, those zygotes are going to make their way back down into the uterus and implant themselves. Okay, for the first 2 months of development, it's called an embryo. Okay, after 2 months of development, you can call it the fetus. Okay. The growth of both the embryo and the fetus is dependent upon the placenta, where you actually have intermingling of maternal and fetal blood. Okay, and we talked about IgG antibodies can cross the placenta, right, to give passive immunity to that developing embryo and fetus. Okay, but once born, infants only get IgA antibodies through breast milk. Okay, but IgG antibodies can cross that placenta. About 9 months later, you get parturition or birth. Okay, but until then, the cervix is going to hold in that developing embryo and fetus. Okay. What we're going to talk a little more detail about is how sex is determined. So we mentioned that there's 2 sex chromosomes. Okay, you all know that if you have 2 X chromosomes, you're female, and if you get one of those Y chromosomes, you end up as a male. Okay, males produce gametes that can either have an X or a Y. So this means males determine the sex of the offspring. Okay. You always get an X from your mother. And if you're a female, you got an X from your father. And if you're male, you got a Y from your father. Okay? So what happens is if you get a Y chromosome, that Y chromosome has an SRY gene. Okay? That SRY gene turns on really early in development. And it starts the production of testosterone. Okay, and the presence of testosterone causes the Wolffian ducts to turn into the male reproductive structures. Okay, so you have to have testosterone production start to increase, and then the Wolffian ducts will turn into the male reproductive tract. The Y chromosome also causes the production of Mullerian inhibiting substance. That's what the MIS is. And that causes those Mullerian ducts to regress. Okay, without testosterone, so without the Y chromosome, if you just have two X chromosomes, there's no production of testosterone. So that means the Wolffian ducts don't develop. They just regress. Okay, whereas you also don't produce the Mullerian inhibiting substance if you have two X chromosomes. So instead, the Mullerian ducts develop into the female reproductive tract. So let's look at those Wolffian ducts versus the Mullerian ducts. Okay, so here we have both structures. So yellow is the primitive gonad. It hasn't decided to be a testis yet or an ovary yet. Okay, it's primitive. It could become either one. And then we have both the Wolffian ducts, right, which are in the lighter pink, and the Mullerian ducts, which are in the slightly darker pink. With a Y chromosome, testosterone production will start, and Mullerian inhibiting substance will be produced, and that will cause the Wolffian ducts to develop and the Mullerian ducts to regress. And this happens 7 to 8 weeks after fertilization. So this is really early on. Okay? And then that testis is producing testosterone. Okay? And then at birth, you have the full male reproductive tract. Okay? Sperm production hasn't started yet. If there is no Y chromosome, there's no testosterone being produced, and there is no Mullerian inhibiting substances, the Wolffian ducts will just regress on their own. Okay, they need testosterone to develop. You're not going to have testosterone production, so instead the gonad's going to become an ovary, right? And then the Mullerian ducts are going to develop into the uterine tubes and uterus, okay? And then at birth, you have the female reproductive tract. This happens a week or two after male reproductive tract. Okay. Any questions about the basics of reproductive physiology? Okay, so we'll start talking about the male reproductive tract then. And we'll talk about the female one on Friday. So here we have a cross-section of a male. Okay, and you know it's a male because we've got a testes and we have a penis, right? And what's also being shown here is the urinary bladder and the rectum, just to, you know, show where everything is. Okay, there are two testes, okay, but this is a cross-section, so one of them's on the other half of the body, right, or cartoon, because this is just a drawing. Okay, the testes hangs outside of the abdominal cavity inside the scrotum. And why does the testes hang outside of the body? Who knows why? So it's at the proper temperature, right? So sperm like to develop at a temperature that's slightly below body temperature. Okay? So I heard a hot tub comment. So males who are trying to impregnate someone should not spend a lot of time in hot tubs or wearing really tight pants. Okay? Leather pants are a no-go. Males who are trying not to impregnate people should wear leather pants in hot tubs. I don't think that's a really good idea because they'd probably never come off, right? They'd shrink to fit. Okay, so whichever way you're trying to go, either spend a lot of time in hot environments or don't spend a lot of time in hot environments. Okay, because sperm production works best at temperatures slightly below body temperature. Okay, sperm gets produced in the testes. Okay, it's going to gain motility and mature in the epididymis, and then its exit point from the body is through the vas deferens, which then joins with the urethra. And the urethra is a common exit point for urine as well. Okay, they both exit via the urethra and the penis. Okay, the human penis is filled with erectile tissue, which engorges with blood during erection, and which branch of the autonomic nervous system causes erection? Does anyone remember? Parasympathetic, because that's for the point portion. And then which causes ejaculation? Sympathetic, because that's the shoot portion, right? And we'll talk about how erection works. Okay. And then we've got some accessory glands. We've got the seminal vesicles, we've got the bulbal urethral glands, and then we have the really pesky prostate gland. The prostate gland actually encircles the urethra, right? And it continues to grow throughout a male's lifespan, okay? And it will sort of pinch off the urethra. So as males age, they have a harder and harder time urinating because their urethra is basically pinching off, no, their prostate gland is basically pinching off the urethra. Also, the prostate gland often becomes cancerous because it does so much cell division, right? So that's why prostate cancer is a super common cancer in males only. Okay, so the testes are the gonads for males. They're the site of sperm production, maturation, and storage. Okay, and they're suspended in the scrotum because they like to be at a cooler temperature for optimal sperm development. Okay, we've got the seminiferous tubules, which actually produce the sperm, and then we have the epididymis, where we get sperm maturing, and then the vas deferens is where they're going to get stored until emission. Okay, there's lots of nerves and blood vessels going to the testes to support sperm development. Okay, if we look at a cross-section of those seminiferous tubules, okay, the epithelial cells that make up the seminiferous tubules are called Sertoli cells. Okay, they're a specialized type of epithelial cell. And then in between those seminiferous tubules, we have these interstitial cells that are called Leydig cells, and they're being shown in blue. Okay, the Leydig cells, or also known as interstitial cells, secrete testosterone. Okay. They are responsive to the luteinizing hormone, okay, which is secreted from your anterior pituitary. Okay, so luteinizing hormone secretion tells those Leydig cells to produce testosterone. And then the Sertoli cells support sperm development. So here we have a bigger cross-section of those Sertoli cells. The Sertoli cells support sperm production. They are sensitive to testosterone. Okay, so Sertoli cells need both testosterone and follicle-stimulating hormone in order to cause sperm production. Okay, so they need FSH and testosterone. Okay, there is a blood-testis barrier, just like the blood-brain barrier. Okay, but anything that can get across the blood-brain barrier can also get across the blood-testis barrier. Okay, so illicit drugs do affect sperm production. Right, males have the external genitalia of having. That was an awkward sentence. Okay, so males have a penis, right? That's the external genitalia. It is the copulatory organ. The role is to penetrate the vagina and give the sperm a more likely passageway all the way up into the uterine tubes. Okay, so increase the likelihood of fertilization. Right? At rest, it is flaccid. After sexual arousal, it undergoes erection. And so this spongy erectile tissue fills with blood because blood flow to the penis increases due to parasympathetic nervous system causing vasodilation of arterioles. And this is the only instance where the parasympathetic nervous system, A, innervates arterioles, right, and then causes vasodilation. Okay. And then ejaculation is when sperm is released through the penis via the urethra, and that is controlled by the sympathetic nervous system. Right? So we have a flow diagram explaining erection versus ejaculation. Okay, so we've got either mechanical stimulation or stuff coming from the brain, which is telling the spinal cord to decrease the sympathetic nervous system, right, activity to those arterioles and increase parasympathetic nervous system activity to those arterioles. Okay, so you have to have dampening down of the sympathetic and increase in parasympathetic, right? That's going to cause the arterioles to vasodilate. When they vasodilate, that increases blood flow, which increases blood volume and blood pressure, which is going to cause erection. That erection also causes compression of the veins, so less blood can leave. Okay, so that decreases the outflow, which actually causes positive feedback, leading to erection. Okay, so the parasympathetic nervous system plays a major role in erection. Okay. The erectile dysfunction drugs are vasodilators. Okay? So Viagra is a vasodilator, and that's why it's sometimes used as an athletic performance enhancing drug. Right? Because it causes vasodilation, and especially for endurance activities. So there was a while that I think it was Floyd Landis got caught using some erectile dysfunction drug. This was years ago, right? In one of the Tour de France stages. Okay. Hi. Besides sperm, there is fluid excreted with the ejaculate, and that fluid comes from the accessory glands. So we've got the seminal vesicles, there's 2 of those, there's only 1 prostate gland, and then there's 2 bulbourethral glands. Okay, the seminal vesicles secrete an alkaline fluid. And why do you think they're secreting alkaline fluid? Yeah?
I'm trying to figure out how to phrase it politely. Vaginal passageway is acidic?
That is true, but what else is acidic? The urethra, because urine is also acidic. But you're totally right. Yep, that the vagina is oftentimes acidic as well. Okay, also secretes fructose to feed those hungry sperm. So those sperm have flagella, right? And that whipping motion requires energy, right? And that energy is coming from fructose. Okay, also contains enzymes to activate the sperm so that they become nice and motile. And prostaglandins, and a lot of those prostaglandins are actually to cause the uterus to become quiet so that the sperm can make their way up. Right? So those prostaglandins are actually acting as signals to the female reproductive tract. Okay, the prostate secretes citrate, zinc, and enzymes, again, to activate those sperm. Okay, zinc deficiencies will affect the prostate gland and also affect sperm motility. Okay, so again, if you're trying to impregnate someone, make sure you're up on your zinc. If you're not, who cares? Well, no, zinc does other things too. Okay, and then the bulbourethral glands secrete a viscous fluid with mucus. Right, again, to line the urethra, which is normally pretty acidic, so that you don't damage the sperm. Okay. Right, we're going to talk about male reproductive hormone regulation. And you're going to, when we talk about female reproductive hormone regulation, you're going to wish it's a simple flow diagram like being shown right here. Okay, hormone regulation in males is much simpler than hormone regulation in females. So in males, testosterone production starts to increase during puberty. Okay, you basically have steady levels of testosterone until 40s or 50s, and then testosterone production starts to taper off as men age, right? There's not cyclical changes in testosterone production. Okay? And testosterone production and spermatogenesis are controlled hormonally by what are called gonadotropins. right? And the gonadotropins are released from the anterior pituitary. And the gonadotropins, follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, are named for their roles in the female reproductive system. Okay, so follicle-stimulating hormone stimulates follicle production in females, but it also stimulates gametogenesis in males. It's just that it's the production of sperm, not follicles. Okay, and then luteinizing hormone stimulates estrogen production in females and testosterone production in males. And luteinizing hormone in females surges and causes luteinization, which is where it gets its name from. And luteinization is another term for ovulation. Right? In males, LH or luteinizing hormone just causes testosterone production. Okay, those gonadotropins are under the control of the hypothalamus because, as we learned in the endocrine system, the hypothalamus controls the anterior pituitary by releasing tropic hormones. Right? So hypothalamus releases gonadotropic releasing hormone. Okay, so GnRH, which then causes the anterior pituitary to release both FSH and LH. LH targets the Leydig cells. Those are the interstitial cells that are found between the seminiferous tubules in the testes. And when LH levels increase, the Leydig cells produce testosterone in response. Okay, testosterone then negatively feeds back on luteinizing hormone secretion and GnRH. Okay, so that you get nice stable levels of testosterone. Okay, because it works by negative feedback. Testosterone plus follicle-stimulating hormone targets those Sertoli cells that make the epithelial cells lining the seminiferous tubules. And when you have follicle-stimulating hormone and testosterone, so both those Sertoli cells are going to cause spermatogenesis to proceed. If spermatogenesis continues, but there's not regular emission of sperm, those Sertoli cells produce a hormone called inhibin. Okay? Inhibin negatively feeds back and shuts off FSH secretion only. Okay, so basically the Sertoli cells are saying, hey, there's a backlog of sperm, we don't need to make any more. Okay, so that shuts off spermatogenesis, but it does not shut off testosterone production. Okay, so males can stop producing sperm, yet still produce testosterone. Okay, and this is what happens during vasectomies, right? So when males get a vasectomy, there's no exit pathway anymore for sperm. Okay, so they're going to shut off spermatogenesis by having the Sertoli cells constantly release inhibin, but they'll still maintain regular blood levels of testosterone. Okay. Testosterone, besides stimulating spermatogenesis, also causes the development of the secondary sexual characteristics, which are what in males? What are secondary sexual characteristics you find in males only?
Deep voice, body hair.
Deep voice, well, body hair, especially on the face, right, and the chest and back, generally, right? What are you pointing at? What?
Adam's apple.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Okay. Also, testosterone causes protein synthesis in skeletal muscle, which is why androgens, steroid hormones, are a commonly used performance-enhancing drug, right? Because they're super effective. You can take them orally, you can put it on as a patch, and it causes your muscles to bulk up. Okay? The problem is if you take too much exogenous testosterone, your testes will stop producing testosterone because it works by negative feedback, because you'll shut off GnRH, which means you'll shut off FSH and LH secretion, and you'll get testicular atrophy. Okay? So you'll have nice big muscles and small testicles. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about sperm. So we've got 3 regions in sperm. There's the head region, the midpiece region, and the tail region. The head region is what contains the nucleus, which contains that haploid set of chromosomes. Okay, the acrosomes contains enzymes to break through the zona pellucida in order to bring about fertilization. Okay, and then when fertilization occurs, those half set of chromosomes get injected into the ovum in order to make the diploid zygote. Okay, but the sperm only donates chromosomes. Okay, in the midpiece we have a whole bunch of mitochondria, but those stay with the sperm even after fertilization. Okay, so all the mitochondria in the zygote and in you came from your mother. Right? Because mitochondria have their own DNA and replicate themselves. Okay? So you didn't get any mitochondria from your father. You only got mitochondria from your mother. Okay? The midpiece is filled with those mitochondria, right, to provide ATP to the flagella. Right? Because the flagella does those whip-like motions which are energetically expensive. Okay? So loads of mitochondria in order to gain motility for that sperm. And then remember, some of those accessory glands put nutrients into the semen so that the sperm have nutrients for movement. Okay, spermatogenesis, or the production of sperm, occurs in the testes, and it's directed by those Sertoli cells. And the Sertoli cells need both follicle-stimulating hormone in the blood coming from the anterior pituitary and testosterone coming from those Leydig cells. And then the Leydig cells are the interstitial cells. So they lie really close to the Sertoli cells. Okay, so we've got the Sertoli cells, and they are supporting spermatogenesis. And so spermatogenesis occurs from puberty onward because the spermatogonia are constantly replicating themselves via mitosis. Right? And remember, cell division comes in two types, mitosis and meiosis. So mitosis is one round of replication of DNA and one round of cell division. Okay, so mitosis makes diploid daughter cells. Okay, so when spermatogonia are replicating themselves, right, they're undergoing mitosis. When spermatogenesis occurs, some of those spermatogonia undergo meiosis, right? And meiosis is one round of DNA replication and two rounds of cell division. So meiosis 1 is the first round of cell division, and you get secondary spermatocytes, which are diploid. Okay, and then in the second round of cell division, which is meiosis 2, you get haploid spermatids. And notice at this point they don't have any flagella. Okay, they are then going to become spermatozoa, so they're going to get that head region, mid-piece, and tail region. And at that point, they're going to be released into the lumen of the seminiferous tubule. They're not motile yet. Okay? They're not yet fully mature. Okay? And then again, spermatogenesis is supported by those Sertoli cells under the direction of both follicle-stimulating hormone and testosterone. Okay, so the spermatozoa that have head region, mid-pieces, and tail regions get released into the lumen of those seminiferous tubules, and they hang out there for about 20 days. And during that time, they're immotile. They're not fully functional yet. Okay, and then they're going to move to the epididymis, right, due to peristaltic contractions of smooth muscle that lines those seminiferous tubules, as well as the flow of luminal fluid inside the seminiferous tubules. And at this point, they're going to attain motility, right? And then they're just going to hang out in the vas deferens. Again, they move there due to peristalsis of smooth muscle until ejaculation. Okay, and so ejaculation is controlled by the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, we talked about erection, and that's controlled by the parasympathetic nervous system, and that's due to the parasympathetic nervous system causing vasodilation of the arterioles, supplying the spongy tissue in the penis. right? And it works by a positive feedback mechanism. And then you have to go from parasympathetic stimulation to sympathetic stimulation to get ejaculation. Okay, so switch from parasympathetic to sympathetic. And that sympathetic stimulation causes contractions of the smooth muscle in the epididymis. Okay, so this is under sympathetic control because it's smooth muscle. It's not consciously controlled. You also get contractions of the vas deferens and the ejaculatory duct. So you get secretions from those accessory glands. And the result is the movement of semen, which is sperm, plus the fluid from those accessory glands into the urethra. Right? So parasympathetic for erection, sympathetic for ejaculation. Okay. Any questions about the male reproductive system? Okay, let's talk about the female reproductive system. Okay, the female reproductive system differs from the male in that you get cyclical changes in activity, which is the menstrual cycle, right? Males from puberty onward are fertile all the time, right? Females are only fertile a portion of the time during the menstrual cycle. Okay, so they have restricted periods of fertility, a day or two before and after ovulation. So on average, the menstrual cycle is about 28 days, and the fertile period is anywhere between 2 and 4 days of that 28. Okay. Another major difference between males and females is that females have limited gamete production. The pool of gametes is actually established at birth, right? Whereas males will undergo spermatogenesis, again, as soon as testosterone levels increase during puberty and as long as they remain high enough throughout their lifespan. Okay, spermatogenesis might dip off, especially 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, right? But they still might produce some sperm. Okay, so obviously the reproductive tract in females differs from the reproductive tract in males, right? So we've got the gonads in females are ovaries, right? And the ovaries are the site of follicle development. And each menstrual cycle, one follicle, or sometimes two, right, gets ovulated and ends up in the uterine tube, which is also known as the oviduct or the fallopian tube. Okay, they're all the same thing. And the uterine tube is the pathway from the ovary into the uterus. Okay, fertilization occurs in the uterine tube, and then that fertilized zygote has to make its way to the uterus and implant itself in the uterine wall. What happens if you get implantation in the uterine tube? What's that called? Ectopic pregnancy. Okay, and it's a life-threatening disorder, right? You cannot support pregnancy to term in an ectopic pregnancy. Okay, and then we have the uterus, which is going to be the site of implantation and development of the fetus. Okay, the cervix is what's going to be holding in that developing fetus, right? And then the exit pathway for the fetus is the vagina, which is also the entrance pathway for sperm. Right? And there's 2 ovaries and 1 uterus. And if we look up a blow-up of this uterus, we've got some granulosa cells that are surrounding the developing follicle, okay? And they eventually differentiate into theca cells and granulosa cells. So the theca cells are surrounding that developing follicle. And we've got those granulosa cells, and this is a Graafian follicle that's about to be ovulated. Right? And the little purple cell is that actual follicle, the oocyte. Okay, so the uterus is the site of fetal development. The outer layer is the perimetrium, okay, and it's epithelial cells and connective tissue. The middle layer is the thickest layer, and that is the myometrium, and that's the smooth muscle layer. And it is the largest muscle in the human body. And only half the humans have it, okay? It's capable of intense contractions in order to expel that bowling ball out of a fairly narrow opening, right? The inner layer of the uterus is the endometrium. This is another layer of epithelial cells, also some connective tissue, and numerous glands. And this is the layer that gets shed during the menstrual cycle. Okay? Nothing happens to the perimetrium or the myometrium during the menstrual cycle. It's the endometrium that gets shed. Okay, the uterine tubes, which are also known as fallopian tubes or oviducts. Okay, my preferred term is fallopian tubes, right? But of course, the textbook uses the most boring one, which is uterine tubes. Okay, they are how the ovulated ova gets transported from the ovary to the uterus, and they are the site of fertilization. Okay, and these fimbria help catch the ovulated egg. Okay, and if it doesn't get caught by the fimbria and enter the uterine tube, it's not going to get fertilized. Okay, so like the testes in males, oogenesis occurs in the ovaries of females. Okay, so during fetal development, okay, this is the big difference between males and females. This is only going to occur during fetal development. Oogonia replicate and differentiate via mitosis. Okay, in males, spermatogonia throughout male's lifespan will replicate and differentiate by mitosis. But this only happens during fetal development in females. Okay, and then before birth, you get a set number of primary oocytes that enter what's called meiotic arrest. Okay, so they've done DNA replication, but they haven't divided yet. Okay, but there's a set number of primary oocytes in the ovaries of females at birth, and that's it. Not going to make more. Okay, what happens is prior to ovulation during the menstrual cycle, that one or sometimes two, or if you take fertility drugs, sometimes 6 to 8, right? If you end up having quintuplets or something, start undergoing meiosis. Okay, so you get meiosis 1, which is the first round of cell division. However, that round of cell division is not equal. Okay, one secondary oocyte gets all of the cytosol and all of the organelles. Okay, and makes this nice big fat secondary oocyte. And then the extra set of chromosomes ends up in what's called the polar body. Okay, which is just containing that DNA that's not needed. Okay, so you get unequal cell division. And this is why the ovum, which second round of cell division, doesn't even occur until after fertilization. Okay, and again, it's super unequal, and so this ovum gets all the organelles in the cytosol, and then you get a second polar body that just has that second set of chromosomes. Okay, and at this point, the male will have provided a sperm, which will have provided just chromosomes for fertilization. Okay, and so this is why the ovum is one of the largest cells in the human body, because you get this super unequal cell division during meiosis. Okay, and this meiosis 2 only occurs after fertilization. Yeah?
So the secondary oocyte, is that haploid?
So the secondary oocyte is actually technically diploid, right? So it's got 2 sets of haploid. That's why the N times 2. Okay, so the chromosomes aren't interacting the way they do when you have diploid cells, right? They're actually being separated. And then half of those chromosomes go into the polar body, and the other set goes into the ovum.
So the primary oocyte then has 2 sets?
2 sets. So it's double diploid. I don't think there's a term. Quadploid. There's no real term for that. Yep, has 2 sets. Okay. So females have cyclical changes in fertility, and those cyclical changes are called the menstrual cycle. So this is repeated changes in both the ovary and the uterus. So we're going to separate it into what's happening in the ovary and call that the ovarian cycle, and then what's happening in the uterus and call it the uterine cycle, but the menstrual cycle combines the two. Okay, and the ovarian cycle drives the uterine cycle. Okay, the ovarian cycle is what causes changes in estrogen and progesterone concentrations. Because the ovaries are the gonads, they produce the sex hormones, and those are in female estrogen and progesterone. Okay, so we'll talk about the ovarian cycle first, then we'll talk about the uterine cycle, and then we'll put them all together. Okay, so the ovarian cycle has two phases. The follicular phase and the luteal phase. Okay, so here we're going to sort of put this figure all together. So what this top layer of the figure is showing is the follicular phase in tan, the luteal phase in purple. Okay, the follicular phase lasts about 14 days on average. The luteal phase lasts another 14 days, meaning that the menstrual cycle on average is 28 days in humans. Okay. Follicular phase is menstruation to ovulation. Okay, so ovulation marks the separation between the follicular phase and the luteal phase. Then the luteal phase is ovulation to right before menstruation. Okay, and what's happening in the ovary at the time is during the follicular phase, we get the development of the Graafian follicle, right? And then that secondary oocyte gets ovulated. Okay, the remaining granulosa cells and theca cells turn into what's called the corpus luteum. Okay, so this yellow blob in number 6 is the corpus luteum. Okay, and then the corpus luteum dominates during the luteal phase. And if you don't get implantation and the production of human chorionic gonadotropin, the corpus luteum will degenerate, right? And a new follicle will develop. Okay. So let's look at this, and we'll actually put it inside an ovary. So this is a step diagram. It's not like all these stages are going on in the same ovary at the same time. Okay. Showing what happens to a single follicle during the ovarian cycle. Okay, so we have a primordial follicle, and there's a set number of these primordial follicles in the ovaries of females at birth. Okay, so one of these primordial follicles is going to start undergoing meiosis and produce a secondary oocyte, and that's going to become that primary follicle. Right, so we've got the oocyte, and then we've got it surrounded. These follicular cells differentiate into what are called granulosa cells and theca cells, and they support the development of that oocyte. That's just going to turn into the secondary follicle, which is characterized by having this antrum, which is a fluid-filled sac. Okay, the antrum increases in size as that follicle continues to develop until you get ovulation, in which case the oocyte enters the uterine tube. And then those remaining theca and granulosa cells become the corpus luteum. Right? And if pregnancy and implantation do not occur, that corpus luteum degenerates. Okay, so this is 14 days through 1 through 5, and then another 14 days for 6 through 9. Okay, so the ovarian cycle drives the uterine cycle. Because the ovarian cycle is what causes changes in estrogen and progesterone levels. And changes in estrogen and progesterone levels change things within the uterus. So for the uterine cycle, it's considered menstruation is the start of the uterine cycle. Okay, so the endometrial layer is shed. And then it starts again with the endometrium layer thickening. Okay? Ovulation causes the formation of the corpus luteum. At that point, you get both estrogen and progesterone. And that causes blood supply to the endometrium to increase. Okay, if the corpus luteum degenerates, you get drop off in estrogen and progesterone. And then that cuts off the blood supply to the endometrium, and menstruation begins again because that layer is shed. Okay. The endometrium thickens during the follicular phase because that developing follicle produces estrogen only. Okay, so estrogen only causes the endometrium to thicken. Estrogen plus progesterone causes increased blood supply. Oh, yeah.
So, y'all are going to learn way more about my life than you even care to know. But when my wife and I were trying to get pregnant, she would go months without ovulating. So, diagnosed with anovulation. And we used Clomid and progesterone. But if she went like 32 days or something without ovulating, then we used progesterone to kind of reset her cycle. So what was going on?
Okay, so we're going to talk about hormone levels. So ask your question again if you still have it when we show the slide with the hormone levels. Okay? Right, because we're sort of adding each step at the moment. Okay, so here we've got the top part of the figure showing the ovarian cycle. And here we have what's going on in the uterus, so the uterine cycle. And here we have names for the different phases of the uterine cycle. So during the follicular phase, the start of the follicular phase is menstruation, so shedding of that endometrial layer. Okay, and then as the follicle starts to develop, more and more estrogen gets produced, and that causes the proliferative phase, where the lining of the endometrium increases, it thickens. Okay, ovulation then causes the corpus luteum to develop, and the corpus luteum produces both estrogen and progesterone, which then causes the secretory phase of the uterus. So at this point, the uterus is ready for implantation. You have an increased blood supply. It's ready for that fertilized zygote to move down through the uterine tube and implant itself into that endometrial layer. If the corpus luteum degenerates because there's no implantation, blood supply is going to be cut off because you're going to have a decrease in estrogen and progesterone, and then that's going to lead to menstruation. Okay, we're now going to add the hormones to this. I've mentioned them already, but now this figure is sort of layering the hormones into it as well. Okay, so females don't have just nice steady levels of estrogen and progesterone. They have cyclical changes in estrogen and progesterone. And so during the follicular phase, estrogen is the predominant sex steroid. Very little progesterone is being produced. Okay, those developing follicles produce estrogen only. And then in the luteal phase, which is dominated by that corpus luteum, you get both estrogen and progesterone production. Okay, and it's estrogen only that causes the proliferative phase, and it's estrogen plus progesterone that causes the secretory phase. If the corpus luteum degenerates because there's no implantation, estrogen and progesterone levels drop off, and that's what causes menstruation, is low levels of estrogen and progesterone. Okay? These are sex steroids, so they cross the blood-brain barrier, so they affect behavior. Okay, so just like if you take exogenous androgens, right, to bulk up, that can lead to roid rage. Okay, testosterone causes an increase in aggression. Okay, changes in estrogen and progesterone levels also cause mood changes in females, right? So that big drop off in estrogen and progesterone right before menstruation is what causes premenstrual syndrome, behavior changes, okay? Now, estrogen and progesterone levels differ, right, throughout the cycle. And during the follicular phase, what you'll notice is we see this nice increase in luteinizing hormone. Okay, this increase in luteinizing hormone is what causes this bump in estrogen production, which then also causes this bump in luteinizing hormone production. Okay, so early on, luteinizing hormone and estrogen work by negative feedback. Okay, and then in the late follicular phase, estrogen and luteinizing hormone work by positive feedback. Okay, so we have a switch from negative feedback in early follicular phase to positive feedback in late follicular phase, and it's this luteinizing hormone surge or LH surge that causes luteinization or ovulation. Okay, follicle stimulating hormone. Notice that we get this bump in follicle stimulating hormone in the early follicular phase. That's what causes follicular development. Right? And then FSH levels actually start to decrease because the dominant follicle actually starts to produce inhibin. Okay, so inhibin production is increasing here so that we get a decrease in FSH so we don't produce a whole bunch of follicles. Okay, so that we get one dominant follicle. And what a lot of the fertility drugs do is they actually cause the development of multiple follicles all at once. Right, in order to increase the chances of fertilization. Right, if you ovulate 4 to 6 instead of just 1, more likely to get fertilization and implantation. Or if you're trying to harvest eggs, right, same idea. You want to have a whole bunch ovulated at once so that you only have to do that harvesting procedure once, right? Okay, so after ovulation, okay, we see decreases in luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. Basically, the corpus luteum is controlling itself. Okay, the corpus luteum is not taking directions from the anterior pituitary in the luteal phase. Okay, those gonadotropins are only controlling things in the follicular phase. Okay. So we've got 2 flow diagrams looking at how luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone are regulated during early to mid follicular phase and late follicular phase. So early to mid follicular phase, this looks a lot like the flow diagram we looked at in males. Okay, we've got gonadotropin releasing hormone secretion from the hypothalamus, which causes FSH secretion, and luteinizing hormone secretion from the anterior pituitary. Okay, LH targets the theca cells, which the theca cells produce androgens. Theca cells actually produce testosterone. Okay, just like those Leydig cells. What happens is the granulosa cells produce an enzyme called aromatase that converts testosterone into estrogen. Okay, so testosterone is the precursor to estrogen. So basically, females produce testosterone, but they immediately convert it into estrogen. Okay, so this means increase in estrogen secretion. Okay, and then follicle stimulating hormone also targets those granulosa cells. So both FSH and estrogen causes that oogenesis and follicular development. Once a single follicle gets large enough, it starts to produce inhibin to negatively feed back on FSH, so you get only one follicle developing. Okay, so remember we see that increase in FSH and then it starts to decrease, and that decrease is due to inhibin production. Okay. Late follicular phase, things change. Okay, we go from negative feedback to positive feedback. Okay, so there's a switch in the receptors for estrogen, right? And in this case, increasing estrogen secretion actually increases GnRH and LH secretion, as well as FSH, but at this point, no other follicles are developing. Okay, so we get that little blip in FSH, but it's really the luteinizing hormone that's increasing estrogen secretion, which then increases LH secretion, which then increases estrogen secretion, which then increases LH secretion, which causes that LH surge. Okay, and so people who take fertility tests that are similar to pregnancy tests where you pee on a stick, right? It's just doing an ELISA to detect luteinizing hormone. Because the higher the amount of luteinizing hormone in your urine, that means you're in the LH surge. Yeah.
With the process of like fertility assistance,
Yeah.
when we're looking at that previous slide, would it say like if you had a decrease in LH or the theca cells weren't working, would you actually give the woman testosterone injections or something?
No. So a potential fertility issue is that women produce too much testosterone, right? You don't want to give women testosterone because if you're going to give them an exogenous steroid, you're going to give them estrogen directly.
Okay, I didn't know if it kind of...
Right, if you give women exogenous testosterone, they're going to bulk up and grow facial hair and get bacne and, yeah.
I just wondered if there's a way...
No, so during fertility treatment, they don't give women testosterone. Yep. Mm-hmm. Hey, so estrogen versus progesterone have different actions, okay? They are different hormones. So during the follicular phase, estrogen promotes endometrial growth. Okay, so it causes the proliferative phase in the uterine cycle. It promotes oogenesis and follicle development. Okay, it increases luteinizing hormone receptors on those granulosa cells to make them more sensitive, which is going to then set the stage for that LH surge. It's going to increase progesterone receptors in the uterus. So these C's should be up arrows, not C's. Okay, so it increases progesterone receptors in the uterus to get the uterus ready for the luteal phase, which is when implantation would occur. And it's also going to increase LH secretion in the late follicular phase. Okay, that's where we get that positive feedback going on. Okay, during pregnancy, as well as the luteal phase, estrogen promotes the growth of duct tissue and deposition of fat in breasts to get ready for milk production, right? It's going to suppress lactation, though. So at birth, both estrogen and progesterone levels drop way off to allow lactation to occur because estrogen suppresses it. So that's why women who are trying to lactate, when they go on birth control after giving birth, they get progesterone only birth control because estrogen suppresses lactation. Okay, it's also going to promote the growth and contractile activity of the smooth muscle in the uterus to get ready for childbirth. It's going to increase oxytocin receptors in the uterus. And remember, way back when we talked about oxytocin, it causes uterine contractions for childbirth. And then it also promotes fluid retention. Okay. Progesterone is only present in the luteal phase in pregnancy, and it promotes the secretory phase of the uterus to get it ready for implantation. It keeps the uterus quiet. So again, at birth, estrogen and progesterone levels drop way off so that you can have uterine contractions and start lactation. Okay, it also promotes the growth of glandular tissues in breasts, so it gets ready for milk production, but just like estrogen, it suppresses it. Yeah?
I was going to say, so that drop off in estrogen right after pregnancy, after birth, does that play a part in postpartum depression?
It plays a huge part. It's both estrogen and progesterone, and again, they are steroid hormones. They cross the blood-brain barrier, right? And they affect behavior. And so pregnant women are crazy, right? Because of those super high levels of steroid hormones. And then that huge drop off also often causes mood changes, right? And one of them can be really severe postpartum depression. Yep. Yeah.
With that slide, are there main points we want to memorize or just kind of digest it off? That slide with the effects of...
The effects of estrogen and progesterone? I would know the effects of estrogen and progesterone. Take the quiz to find out what I might ask you about the effects of estrogen and progesterone.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, so the last thing we'll talk about with the female reproductive system is hormonal control of pregnancy. right? So here we have estrogen and progesterone levels during pregnancy. So on the x-axis we have months. Okay, so you get ever increasing levels of estrogen and progesterone, and then at parturition or birth, they drop off, and that's allowed for uterine contractions, right, and lactation to begin. But again, this huge drop in steroid hormone production often causes postpartum depression, right? What early on causes the increase in estrogen and progesterone levels is the production of human chorionic gonadotropin. Okay, human chorionic gonadotropin is released by the embryo that's implanted itself in the uterus. Okay, and what HCG is doing is it's telling the ovaries, which at this point have corpus luteum, that stick around. Okay, it keeps the corpus luteums really big and fat, producing estrogen and progesterone. Okay, so early on in pregnancy, the embryo produces HCG, which then keeps the corpus luteum around, which the corpus luteum is producing estrogen and progesterone. Okay, 2 to 3 months in, HCG levels fall off, and the placenta actually starts producing all the estrogen and progesterone. So if you remember when we were talking about the sex hormones during the endocrine system, the placenta was mentioned as an endocrine organ, right? It's an endocrine organ because it produces estrogen and progesterone to support pregnancy. Okay, any questions about the female reproductive tract or the male reproductive tract? Or anything related to reproduction?